The chamber had no windows. It did not need them. The station world of Varath Prime floated in the deep black between 3 star systems. And the beings who gathered inside its great hall had not come to look at stars. They had come to make a decision. The hall was enormous. It could hold 10,000 beings and still feel empty. That night, only the senior delegates of the Galactic Council sat at the long curved table. 41 species, 41 flags, 41 voices that together controlled more than 2,000 star systems. The air inside was recycled and cold. The lights were low. On the far wall, a single blue dot glowed on the star map. Earth. Councillor Drevin of the Veth spoke first. He was old, even by the standards of his species, and his voice had the slow and heavy sound of someone who had been right about things for a very long time. The situation is simple, he said. The humans have broken the threshold. There was silence around the table. Everyone already knew. They had all read the report. But hearing it said out loud in that room made it feel different, more real, more urgent. For 300 years, the Galactic Council had watched humanity from a distance. They had watched through small, quiet survey drones that drifted through the outer edges of the solar system and sent back data without ever being noticed. They had watched a species that was messy, loud, and constantly at war with itself. They had watched humans build and destroy and build again. They had seen wars that killed millions, followed by treaties, followed by more wars. They had seen a species that seemed unable to live in peace with its own kind. The general opinion across the council had always been the same. Humans were not ready. Humans were not stable. Humans were, in the careful language of official council reports, a high-risk primitive civilization with strong self-destructive tendencies. The plan had always been to wait, to keep watching, to let humanity either grow up slowly on its own or collapse under its own weight. Either way, the council would not interfere. The humans were too far behind to be a threat. They were barely managing their own small planet. Then, 14 months ago, everything changed. A human spacecraft had jumped. Not far, less than a light minute. A small, ugly, rattling prototype that looked like it had been built in someone's backyard. But it had bent space. It had folded the distance between 2 points and moved through the fold. It had done the one thing that separated primitive civilizations from real ones. The Council's survey drones had recorded the whole thing. The data had arrived at Varath Prime 6 weeks later. And since that day, the emergency sessions had not stopped. The debate had gone back and forth. Some delegates argued for contact. Others argued for a trade agreement. A few argued for simply increasing surveillance. But Councillor Drevin had argued for something else. "We made a mistake," he said, and his pale eyes moved slowly around the table. "We waited too long. We watched and we waited. And now they have crossed the line. A species like this, unstable, aggressive, tribal, cannot be allowed to reach the stars. Not without control. Not without our guidance." He paused, "and they have made it very clear, in everything we have observed, that they do not accept guidance easily." There were nods around the table. The delegate from the Soroth, a quiet and small being named Lissel, raised her hand and asked whether a peaceful first contact had been attempted, whether the humans had even been told that the council existed. Drevin looked at her the way someone looks at a question they find very boring. "They have not been contacted," he said, "because contact was never necessary before. And now it is too late for contact. Now it is a security matter." Lissel looked down at her hands and said nothing more. The vote was called. It was not close. 37 in favor, 4 against. The motion passed with the quiet efficiency of people who believed they were doing something routine. The sentence was extermination. The Council's military commander, Fleet Admiral Sorok Vel, was brought into the chamber after the vote. He was tall, broad, and covered in the dark gray scales of the Keth people. He had fought in 7 wars. He had never lost a single one. He stood at the head of the table and listened to Drevin explain the mission, with his arms folded behind his back, and his expression completely flat. 9,700 warships. The full weight of the Council's combined military. The largest single fleet deployment in the history of the galaxy. Against one planet. When Drevin finished speaking, Sorak Vel was quiet for a moment. Then he asked one question. What level of resistance are we expecting? Drevin waved a hand. They have one prototype FTL vessel. No military spacecraft capable of space combat. Basic planetary defense systems. Outdated by our standards by roughly 300 years. He tilted his head slightly. The projection models give the campaign a completion time of 4 days, perhaps 5 if they are stubborn. Sorak Vel nodded once. He did not smile, because he was not the kind of being who smiled easily. But there was something relaxed in his posture, something comfortable. He had been given a mountain and told to use it to crush an ant. He accepted the command and left the chamber. The fleet gathered over the course of 3 weeks. Ships arrived from across Council space, pulling out of patrol routes and garrison posts and dry docks. They lined up in the black like a wall of metal that had no end. 9,700 warships. Their engines, when they all lit at once, were bright enough to be seen from a nearby star system with the naked eye. There was no warning sent to Earth, no message, no ultimatum. The Council did not consider it necessary to speak to something it had already decided to remove. You did not send a letter to an insect. The fleet jumped. Far away on a different planet, under a night sky full of stars that most people had never really stopped to think about, a young woman sat alone in a small room full of screens. Dr. Yemi Adeyemi was 31 years old. She worked at a deep space observation post in Chile. A quiet job that mostly involved cataloging distant objects and writing reports that almost no one read. She was good at her job. She was patient and careful, and she noticed things. That night, she noticed something. The gravitational sensors were picking up a pattern. Not one signal, not 10, thousands of them. Thousands of FTL wakes, the kind left behind when something very large moves very fast through folded space. And they were all moving in the same direction. Toward the solar system. Toward Earth. Yemi stared at her screen. Her coffee went cold. Her hands were very still. She had spent her career studying the universe, and she was not a person who frightened easily. But what she was looking at was not a natural event. It was not a cluster of asteroids, or a gravitational anomaly, or a glitch in the equipment. It was a fleet, and it was coming. She picked up her phone. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm, steady, the kind of calm that lives just on the other side of real fear. "Get me the Secretary General," she said. "Get me every department head. Get me everyone." She looked back at the screen one more time. "Tell them we have a problem." The Secretary General of the United Earth Council was a heavy-set man named Petrov Kazan. He had spent 30 years in politics and had seen many crises in his life. Budget collapses, pandemics, wars between nations. He thought he had seen everything that the world could throw at a person. He had not seen this. He stood in the emergency briefing room beneath the Geneva headquarters building and stared at the star map on the wall. The red markers moved slowly, but clearly. Thousands of them, all heading inward, all heading toward one small blue dot in the middle of the screen. Around the table sat the heads of every major military, every major space agency, and every senior government that had been able to send someone in the last 4 hours. Some had come in person. Most were on screens. All of them were quiet. Dr. Yemi Adeyemi stood at the front of the room. Her eyes were steady anyway. Based on the size and speed of the gravitational signatures, she said, we estimate arrival at the outer solar system in 11 days. We do not know their exact weapons. We do not know their exact numbers with perfect certainty. But the low estimate is 8,000 vessels. The high estimate is over 10,000. Someone at the table, a general from the North American Command, let out a slow breath. And our current orbital defense capacity? Yemi looked at him. Not enough. Not even close. Not for this. The room stayed quiet for another moment. Then Petrov Kazan put both hands flat on the table and spoke. Then we use 11 days, he said. Every hour, every person, every resource this planet has. He looked around the room slowly. No nation holds anything back. No program stays secret. Everything comes to the table right now. Understood? That was the first sign that something had shifted. On any other day, in any other crisis, there would have been arguments. There would have been questions about authority and jurisdiction and national interest. There were none. Every person in that room had looked at the same star map. Every person in that room understood what was coming. The meeting lasted 2 more hours. By the end of it, the world had changed. General Mara Vosh had not slept either, but she did not look like someone who needed sleep. She looked like someone who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time, and was simply disappointed it had taken so long to arrive. She stood in the operations center of the Orbital Defense Command, deep in a mountain in Central Europe, and pulled the covers off a program that had been running quietly for 30 years. It was listed in official documents as the Global Debris Mitigation Network. It was officially a system of satellites designed to track and redirect dangerous space junk. It was not that. Over 3 decades, using funding hidden inside climate budgets and infrastructure programs and scientific research grants, a small group of engineers had quietly built something else entirely. 412 satellites in low and mid-orbit, each one carrying a high-velocity kinetic launch rail. On paper, they redirected debris. In reality, they were guns. Big, cold, patient guns that had been sitting in orbit for years, waiting for a reason to fire. Run activation checks on all 412, Vosh said to the officer beside her. I want full status reports within 3 hours. She walked to the next screen. She had 6 more programs to uncover before morning. In a research facility on the edge of Ho Chi Minh City, Chief Engineer Dao Lin had not left her lab in 40 hours. She was small and thin, and she moved between workstations like someone who had too many thoughts and not enough time, which was exactly the situation she was in. The prototype FTL drives that humanity had been developing for the past few years were not military technology. They had been built for exploration. They were designed to move a crewed spacecraft across large distances. They were delicate, expensive, and only 6 fully functional units existed on the planet. Dao Lin was turning them into bombs, not in the simple way, not by filling them with explosive material. The jump itself was the weapon. If you took the FTL drive out of a crewed ship and put it into an unmanned drone, you could program the drone to jump inside an enemy formation. A micro-jump, a tiny fold in space, targeted precisely, when a drone the size of a small car appeared inside a warship, materializing inside the hull, inside the engine room, inside the bridge. The result was not an explosion in the traditional sense. It was simply the end of that warship. She had no way to test it. She had no time to test it. She was building the weapon and trusting the physics, and trying very hard not to think about what would happen if the physics was wrong. How many can we produce in 10 days? She asked her team. Her lead technician looked at the parts inventory and did mental math with a face that suggested the math was not pleasant. If we strip everything not essential and run all 3 shifts, maybe 300 drones, maybe 350. 350, Dao Lin said. It was not a question. It was a decision. That's pushing it hard. Good, she said, and turned back to her screen. Push. Yemi Adeyemi had one more job, and it was the strangest one of all. In a secure storage facility outside of Tokyo, two objects sat in climate-controlled cases behind 3 locked doors. They had been there for 11 years, ever since a fishing vessel in the northern Pacific had pulled something up in its nets that was clearly not from Earth. The government that recovered the objects had quietly kept the discovery to itself, uncertain what to do. Yemi had been brought in 4 years ago to study them. She had been studying them ever since, and getting nowhere. They were survey drones, small, simple, automated. They had been orbiting Earth at high altitude and had malfunctioned, falling into the ocean sometime in the early 2000s. They were not weapons, they were just observers, little metal eyes that someone had sent to watch humanity without being seen. Yemi sat in front of them now with a new purpose. She did not need to understand everything about them. She needed one specific thing. She needed to find the frequency they used to communicate. Because if those drones talked back to wherever they came from, then the incoming fleet used the same communication network. And if you could get into that network, if you could push false signals into it, fake orders, wrong coordinates, conflicting information, you could make 9,000 ships very confused at exactly the wrong moment. She had 10 days to crack a communication system built by a civilization 300 years ahead of her own. She opened the casing on the first drone and picked up her tools. "All right," she said quietly to no one. "Let's see what you're made of." 11 days away, in the cold dark at the edge of the solar system, Fleet Admiral Sorak Vel sat in his command chair and watched the star ahead grow slowly brighter. His fleet surrounded him in every direction. 9,700 ships, the largest force ever assembled in the history of the galaxy. His sensors showed nothing unusual. No movement, no military activity, no signals of alarm from the blue planet ahead. He found that entirely reasonable. Of course they had not detected the fleet. Of course they were not prepared. They were 300 years behind. They were primitive. They were alone. He leaned back in his chair and gave the order to reduce speed for a controlled approach. It did not cross his mind, not for a single second, that the silence coming from Earth was not the silence of ignorance. It was the silence of people who were already working. Sorak Vel gave the order to advance on a Tuesday morning, though he did not know that. Humans measured time in days and weeks and months. He measured it in fleet cycles and mission phases. For him, it was simply the moment the sensors confirmed they had crossed into the solar system, and the blue planet was close enough to see on the long-range visual display. He looked at it for a moment. It was smaller than he expected, soft-looking, blue and white, and quietly beautiful in the way that living worlds often were. He felt nothing in particular looking at it. It was a target, a problem to be removed. He had removed problems before. "Begin advance formation," he said. "All wings move in on schedule." 9,700 ships began to move. For the first 6 hours, nothing happened. The fleet crossed the outer solar system in clean formation, engines burning steady, sensors sweeping ahead for any sign of resistance. No ships rising to meet them. No signal traffic. No emergency launches from the planet's surface. The silence was total. Sorak Vel, second in command, Commander Yathin, noted in the ship's log that the target civilization appeared to have no awareness of the incoming fleet whatsoever. That log entry would later be found floating in the wreckage. No one would find it funny. The asteroid belt was the first thing that killed them. It did not look dangerous. It never did. The belt was exactly what it appeared to be, a wide band of rock and ice and metal, drifting slowly in orbit around the yellow star. The fleet's navigation systems identified the safest path through it, and the ships adjusted course accordingly, spreading into a wider formation to pass through the gaps between the larger rocks. They were halfway through when the rocks moved. Not all of them. Not randomly. Specific ones. Chosen ones. Hundreds of large asteroids that had been very carefully, very quietly fitted with small rocket motors and remote detonation charges over the past 11 days, and in some cases, over the past several years, by a human deep space program that had never made the news and had never been intended to. They did not explode outward like bombs. They accelerated, suddenly and precisely, like bullets that had been waiting patiently inside a gun for a very long time. A rock the size of a large building, moving at the speed of a missile, does not need to explode to destroy a warship. It simply needs to arrive. The first wave of impacts destroyed 216 ships in under 4 minutes. Sorak Vel gripped the arms of his command chair. On every screen around him, ship indicators were going dark. His crew was shouting status reports over each other, and the noise was enormous, and none of it was making the situation better. "Break formation," he ordered. "Scatter and regroup at coordinate 7. The fleet scattered. That was the second mistake. Because the open space between the asteroid belt and the inner planets was not empty either. Dowlin's drones had been waiting there for 3 days, running silent, no engines, no signals, drifting like dead metal in the dark. 344 small, ugly, simple machines, each one carrying a stripped-down FTL drive set to jump on a very short range to a very specific destination. The destinations were the engines of Council warships. The drones lit up all at once. They did not fly toward the fleet. They simply vanished and reappeared, inside hulls, inside engine rooms, inside the long corridors of capital ships that had never been designed to withstand something materializing inside them from nowhere. The results were catastrophic and immediate, and deeply confusing to every Council crew member who survived the first few seconds of it, because their training had never included a scenario where the enemy appeared inside the ship without warning and without a door. In 40 minutes, 311 more ships were gone. Sorak Vel stared at his display. He had lost over 500 ships, and he had not yet seen a single human vessel. He had not yet seen the sun weapon either. The solar focusing arrays had been built over 20 years and were officially part of Earth's global clean energy grid. 47 large orbital mirrors, each one the size of a city block, designed to collect and redirect sunlight to power stations on the ground. They were real. They did power things, but they had a second setting, one that had never been listed in any public document, and General Vosh activated it from her operations center on day 2 of the battle. The mirrors tilted, adjusted, focused. 47 reflective surfaces lined up with the precision of a surgeon's hand, and redirected a concentrated column of solar energy at a single point in space. The column moved, slowly at first, then tracking, following the fleet's new scattered positions with the help of coordinates fed directly from Yemi's infiltration of the Council communication network. 12 capital ships evaporated, not exploded, not damaged, simply ceased to exist in any meaningful way at the point where the beam touched them. Sorak Vel ordered the fleet to pull back toward Jupiter. He needed distance. He needed to stop losing ships for 5 consecutive minutes and figure out what was happening. Jupiter did not help him. The gas giant was enormous and beautiful, and its gravity was a trap that Mara Vosh had spent 4 years learning how to use. Human drone pilots, not machines, but actual human beings sitting in bunkers under the ground, running on caffeine and controlled fear, guided swarms of kinetic missiles on slingshot paths around the planet's massive gravitational field. The trajectories were impossible by conventional targeting logic. The missiles curved and looped and came in from angles that the Council fleet's automated defense systems kept calculating wrong, because the systems had been designed for open space combat and had never needed to account for a planet being used as a weapon. By day 5, the Council had lost 4,040 ships. He gathered his remaining fleet in the space above Saturn's rings, and for the first time in his military career, he sat in silence for a long time before speaking. His crew was scared. He could see it. The Keth did not show fear the way humans did. There were no pale faces or shaking hands, but there was a stillness in their movements, a careful, quiet stillness that meant they were all trying very hard not to think about the number of their friends who were gone. He sent a message back to Varath Prime. He told them the truth. The target had been prepared. The target was fighting in ways that matched no known tactical profile. He was requesting revised orders or reinforcement. Then he ordered his psychological warfare team to begin broadcasting. It was standard procedure. You showed the enemy their losses. You showed them their burning ships. You showed them the size of what was coming for them. It broke morale. It made them hesitate. It had worked in every war the Council had ever fought. The humans received the broadcast. They watched it. Then they sent it back, with additions. They added their own footage alongside it. The asteroid strike, the drone jumps, the solar beam, the slingshot missiles. They added numbers, Council ships destroyed, hour by hour, day by day. They added a single line of text in 200 languages, which Yemi had made sure the Council's own communication network would carry clearly. It said, "We are not finished." On the ships of the Council fleet, crew members watched the broadcast in silence. Some of them had fought in wars before. None of them had ever fought anything that responded to a fear broadcast by broadcasting confidence back. Sorak Vel turned off the screen. He waited 2 days for the reply from Varath Prime. It came in 6 words. "You have 9,700 ships. Finish it." He looked at his display. He counted what he had left. He was no longer sure that was possible. On the 9th day of the battle, Fleet Admiral Sorak Vel did something that no military commander in the recorded history of the Galactic Council had ever done during an offensive campaign. He turned his ships around. He did not announce it dramatically. He did not make a speech. He simply looked at his display for a long time, counted the green indicators that were still lit, and then spoke 2 words to his navigation officer in a voice that was completely flat and completely empty of everything except the truth. "Go home." The order moved through the surviving fleet without argument. There was no debate. No officer stood up and told him to reconsider. The 18 remaining warships, out of 9,700, turned their engines toward the edge of the solar system and began the long, slow journey away from the blue planet that had refused to die. Sorak Vel sat in his command chair and watched Earth shrink on the rear display. He watched it for a long time. It still looked soft, still blue and white, and quietly beautiful. It did not look like something that had just destroyed 9,682 warships. It did not look like a killing ground. It looked like the kind of place where something gentle might live. He had been wrong about a great many things. He pulled up the tactical record on his personal screen and began to read through it from the beginning. Not because he needed to. He had lived every hour of it. He read it because he was trying to understand, and understanding felt important now in a way it had not felt at the start. At the start, understanding had not been necessary. The mission had seemed too simple for understanding to matter. He read for 3 hours. When he finished, he sat back and stared at the ceiling of his bridge. The humans had not won because their weapons were better. In raw terms, a Council warship still outgunned anything humanity had built. The humans had won because they had thought differently. Every trap, every trick, every weapon they had used had come from looking at the battlefield in a way the Council had never looked at it. Using asteroids as missiles, using the sun as a beam weapon, using the gravity of a gas giant as a sling, sending drones to appear inside ships from nowhere. None of these things were in any council tactical manual. None of them had ever needed to be, because no enemy of the council had ever thought of them. The humans had thought of them in 11 days. Sorak Vel opened a new document on his screen and began to write his report. He had written many reports in his career. Battle summaries, casualty assessments, mission reviews. He knew how to write them. He knew the language. Clean, professional, precise. This one would not come out that way. He wrote for a long time. He deleted what he wrote and started again. He deleted that and started again. Finally, he stopped trying to make it sound like a military document and simply wrote what he believed to be true. He wrote that the fleet had not been defeated by superior weapons or superior numbers. He wrote that the humans had fought in a way that was completely outside anything the Council had prepared for. He wrote that their greatest advantage had not been any single weapon or any single strategy. It had been the fact that they did not fight the way a species fights when it is trying to survive. They fought the way a species fights when it is trying. It was everything. He finished the report and sent it to Verath Prime. Then he put his screen away and sat in silence for the rest of the journey. Back on Earth, the silence was a different kind. The tracking boards in the Geneva Command Center showed the 18 Council ships moving away, getting smaller, heading toward the edge of the solar system at full speed, with no sign of turning back. The officers watching the screens did not cheer. Nobody threw their hands up or embraced each other the way people did in old war films. They watched the indicators move, and they breathed, and they were very quiet. General Mara Vosh stood at the back of the room with her arms crossed and her eyes on the display. She looked the way a person looks after they have been holding their breath for 9 days and have only just remembered how to exhale. The victory was real, but she had also seen the damage reports coming in from across the planet, and the word victory felt complicated next to those numbers. 3 coastal cities had been struck by Council weapons in the opening hours of the battle, before the human defenses had gotten fully into position. The strikes had been precise and powerful, and the casualty numbers were still being counted. The orbital infrastructure, satellites, relay stations, the early-stage space platforms that humanity had spent decades building, was largely gone, knocked out in the first exchanges. It would take years to rebuild, maybe longer. The world was alive. The world had won. The world was also badly hurt and standing in the wreckage of what the fight had cost it. Vosh walked outside after the last Council ship crossed the boundary of the solar system. She walked through the mountain facility and out a side door onto a narrow platform cut into the rock, open to the air. The sky above her was clear and dark and full of stars. She stood there for a long time, without moving. Dr. Yemi Adeyemi was watching the same sky from a different place. She was standing on the roof of a temporary command post in what had been 2 weeks ago a normal city. It was not a normal city anymore. The Council weapon that had struck it had not been subtle. Whole blocks were simply flat. The cleanup had begun, but it would take a very long time to finish. She had not known anyone who lived in this city personally, but that did not make standing in it feel like nothing. A young lieutenant came to stand beside her. He was new, young enough that the last 9 days had clearly changed something permanent in his face. He looked at the dark sky and then at her. "They'll tell the Council what happened here," he said. His voice had the careful sound of someone trying to find something hopeful in a long week. Yemi nodded slowly. "Yes," she said, "they will." The lieutenant seemed to take that as a good sign. He almost smiled. Good. Yemi did not smile. She kept looking at the sky. The 18 ship signatures were gone from any sensor she had access to, vanished into FTL and heading home. She thought about what those 18 ships were carrying back with them. Not just survivors. Not just a report. They were carrying a story. A very specific story about a very specific planet that the Council had sent nearly 10,000 ships to destroy, and which had sent almost all of them to the bottom of space. That story was going to spread. It was going to reach every civilization in Council space. Every species that had voted yes in that chamber. Every military mind that would read Sorik Vel's report and sit with it in silence, the way she imagined he had. And some of them would be afraid, and some of them would be angry, and some of them would want to try again, with more ships, with better preparation, with the benefit of knowing what humanity could do. She turned to the lieutenant. His almost smile was still there, patient and waiting. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "That means the Council will know we're still alive." The lieutenant's smile faded. He looked back at the sky. Above them the stars were very still and very far away, and full of things that now knew where Earth was. The Council courier ship was small, embarrassingly small, compared to what had been sent in the other direction 3 weeks earlier. It had no weapons, no escort, no military markings of any kind. It dropped out of FTL at the very edge of the solar system and immediately began broadcasting on every frequency it could reach, repeating the same single word over and over in 200 different languages until someone on Earth received it and understood. Parley. It meant, "We want to talk." Dr. Yemi Adeyemi was the one who received the signal. She had been half expecting something like it, though she had not said so out loud to anyone. She sat with the signal for a few minutes before forwarding it up the chain. Then she went to make herself a cup of tea, because she had a feeling the next few weeks were going to require a great deal of patience, and she intended to start as she meant to go on. The debate about whether to respond took 4 days. There were people who argued that the Council's message was a trick, a way to get humanity to lower its guard before a second fleet arrived. There were people who argued that any meeting should happen on Earth's terms, on Earth's ground, with Earth's weapons within reach. There were people who argued that humanity should not respond at all, and should instead use the time to rebuild its defenses and prepare for whatever came next. Petrov Kazan listened to all of it. He sat at the head of the table in Geneva and let every voice speak, and then he asked one question. "If we say nothing," he said, "what do we think happens?" Nobody had a comfortable answer to that, because the honest answer was that a civilization powerful enough to send 10,000 ships once was powerful enough to send more. And next time they would not come without a plan. Next time they would come having read every piece of intelligence from the first attempt. They would come prepared for the asteroids, the drones, the solar arrays, the gravity slingshots. Humanity had shown its hand in the first battle. The hand had been extraordinary. It had also been nearly everything humanity had. Silence was not safety. Silence was just waiting. "We respond," Kazan said, "and we go to them." The delegation was 5 people. Yemi had insisted on being one of them, and nobody had argued, because she had cracked the enemy's communication system with salvaged drone parts and 11 days of no sleep. And frankly, she had earned whatever she wanted. The other 4 were a military observer, a senior diplomat, a linguist, and Kazan himself, who had decided that if humanity was going to walk into the seat of galactic power for the first time in its history, the person who walked in first should at least be someone who had been elected. They traveled on the Council courier ship, accompanied by 2 of its crew who were very careful and very polite, and who looked at the 5 humans with the specific expression of beings who had read the battle report and were still processing it. The journey to Varath Prime took 9 days. Yemi spent most of it studying everything she had on the Council's culture, its history, and the 41 species that made up its membership. She slept 4 hours a night and read for the rest. On the last day of the journey, Kazan sat down across from her at the small table in the ship's common area and looked at her for a moment. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I know what I want to say," she said. "Whether they're ready to hear it is a different question." He nodded. "Then we make them ready." The council chamber on Vareth Prime was exactly as large and cold and impressive as the reports had suggested. The ceiling was so high it was lost in shadow. The curved table seemed to go on forever. 41 species sat in their places and watched the 5 humans walk across the floor to the single podium that had been placed at the center of the room. It was a very long walk. Yemi made it slowly and without hurrying. She had decided before she entered the room that she would not be hurried by anything inside it. She looked at the faces around the table as she walked. Some of them she recognized from the intelligence files. Some she did not. All of them were watching her with the focused and careful attention of beings who were not sure what to expect and were trying very hard not to show it. She noticed that the chair where Counselor Dreven usually sat was empty. She did not ask about it. She reached the podium. She placed a small data drive on its surface. She looked up at the chamber. Then she spoke. She spoke for 12 minutes. She did not raise her voice once. She did not use dramatic language or long, complicated sentences. She spoke the way she had always spoken, clearly, directly, and with the specific patience of someone who had done the math and was confident in the answer. She told them what had happened in the solar system, not as a boast, as a record. She told them how many ships they had sent and how many had come back, and what the difference between those two numbers had cost both sides. She told them about the cities that were gone and the people who had been in them. She did not tell them this to make them feel guilty. She told them because she wanted them to understand that humanity kept very careful count of things. She told them that Earth had not come to Vareth Prime to ask for membership. They had not come to negotiate terms of surrender or protection or alliance. They had come for one reason only, to make something clear. Humanity existed, humanity remembered, and humanity was watching. She picked up the data drive and held it for a moment before setting it back down. "This contains the complete record of the battle," she said. "Every weapon we used, every ship you lost, every hour of every day of those 9 days. We are giving it to you freely." She paused. "Not because we are showing off, because we want you to understand exactly what the cost was last time, so that when you discuss what comes next, you are discussing it with accurate information." She looked slowly along the length of the curved table. "We did not come here to threaten you," she said. "We came here to tell you that there is another option. Trade, communication, cooperation between your civilizations and ours. We are willing. We are interested. We believe it would be good for everyone at this table. But that willingness has a condition. It requires that you understand we are not asking for your protection. We are not asking for your permission. We are not asking for anything that is yours to give or take away. We are simply here, and we will continue to be here. What you do with that fact will decide what kind of future we share." She stopped speaking. The chamber was so quiet that the hum of the ventilation system was the loudest sound in the room. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for a microphone, or shuffled papers, or leaned over to whisper to a neighbor. 41 species sat completely still and absorbed what had just been said to them. At the far end of the table sat the eldest member of the council. His name was Veloran, and he had governed for over 400 years. He had been present at the founding of 7 member civilizations. He had seen wars and famines and the births of new worlds and the deaths of old ones. He had not felt genuine surprise in a very long time. He felt it now. He looked at the small human woman standing at the podium. She was looking back at him. Her eyes were calm and dark and completely steady. She was not afraid. She was not performing confidence. She simply was not afraid. And the difference between those two things was one that a being of 400 years could recognize immediately. Velorin reached out both of his hands and placed them flat on the table in front of him. It was the oldest gesture of his people. It had not been used in this chamber in living memory. It meant many things. It meant respect. It meant the speaker had the floor for as long as they needed it, and that the one making the gesture would listen without interruption until they were done. It also meant, in the oldest interpretation of the tradition, something simpler and more direct. It meant, you have changed something here today. Yemi looked at the gesture. She did not know exactly what it meant, but she could read a room. She had always been able to read a room, and what she read in that moment was enough. She straightened slightly. She picked up her data drive. She nodded once, with dignity and without performance, and then she turned and walked back across the long floor of the chamber toward the door. Behind her, the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy sat in silence and thought very carefully about what kind of future it wanted. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be exactly the same again.